cactus on my foot, and I was unable to come out for the ceremony. But I'd like to tell you all about my friendship with Fred and some of the adventures and insights that we shared over the past 40 years. But first, let me offer my condolences to Fred, to Fred's family, Frederica, Damien, and Tony. I wanted you to know that I share your sense of loss and your grief. Fred was a really remarkable man. There's no doubt about it. The testament, his life was a testament. Considered Fred one of my best friends. In Fred's second term as academic vice president / dean at San Francisco Art Institute in 1983, he hired me to be what I was aware of the school's most innovative and prestigious art schools, dedicated to fine art writ large. SFAI graduated many of the nation's most influential artists. More than a school, SFAI was a gathering place for artists and innovators in many areas throughout its long history. As Fred pointed out in his annual address to entering students, SFAI was founded on the idea that we're for art and artists, end quote. I came to understand that a big part of the vision that made SFAI so great was Fred himself. For over 40 years, he was at the core, one way or the other, of SFAI's emphasis on artistic and embodied San Francisco Art Institute's history and spirit better than anyone. One of the things I most admired about Fred was his ability to confront pretentiousness and pomposity, especially when it came to art. In his uniquely dignified and soft-spoken way, Fred was brilliant and fearless and often funny in his ability to react what he saw as intellectual bombast. Mark referred to him as Machiavellian. This may be part of that. He could basically put somebody away in a very gentle way with a single one-liner, an intellectual Fred bomb, as it came to be known at the Art Institute. And it would almost inevitably leave the speaker speechless and the other people in the room laughing, sometimes scandalized. I could always count on Fred to let me know when I was being a pompous bore. Fred's first wife, Jean, died a couple of years after Fred and I began working together. I still regret that I never got to know her as well as I would have liked. When Jean passed away, Fred was overcome with grief and sadness. He literally worked his way out of that despair by taking on a staggering number of new projects at SFAI. As the newly appointed Dean of Students by that point, I was swept up in the whirlwind of energy and ambition that Fred brought to the whole school. We all worked really hard in those years. It was then that Fred and I became close friends, often working together late into the evening hours. SFAI gained a new sense of stability, energy, and vitality directly because of Fred's leadership and dedication. During that frenzy of work that Jean's passing, Fred developed major changes in the BFA and MFA programs at SFAI, added important expansions to the faculty and curriculum, and maybe most significantly, created a great expansion of international programs around the world, but especially with China. Ming Ren, talked eloquently about his role in all of that. Fred pioneered really the first educational exchange program between an American and a Chinese art college. In 1985, he visited Zhejiang Academy of Art in China, now the China Academy. The next year, our first MFA exchange student, Ren Ming, who goes by Ming Ren. I'm sorry, I keep referring to you as Ren Ming. That's the way I first came to know you. But Ren Ming arrived in San Francisco as an MFA student, and later went on to become one of Fred's closest friends and his primary source of connection to China and Chinese art scene. I traveled to China with Fred and Ren Ming on several occasions and was always amazed by the deference shown to Fred by nearly everyone. At the time, I thought it was because Fred was old and that the Chinese were just being good Confucianists. But I soon realized that it was a much deeper connection, a mutual recognition between Fred and the entire culture of China. Fred was admired for his simple and unassuming manner, his extraordinary knowledge of art and art history and philosophy, his academic leadership, as well as his powerful painting style. Fred's use of nature-based abstraction and handwritten text, and his preference for artworks made of ink on paper, was recognized by Chinese artists and scholars as sharing a common source of inspiration with both classical and contemporary Chinese art. Fred Martin was perhaps recognized by the Chinese as an American Wenren, a fully cultivated scholar painter, a true literati artist who had somehow transcended cultural boundaries. He exhibited many of the qualities of personal cultivation and good moral character that signify the ideal of the Wenren, literati artist. Fred seemed to be accepted by the Chinese art community in a way that foreigners seldom achieve or even understand. Being a Wenren artist is a very highly revered status in Chinese culture. Fred maintained important contacts with the Chinese art community and the China Academy of Art in particular. Numerous articles were published in China about Fred and his artwork. He had several successful exhibitions in a variety of locations throughout China. On one of our visits to China, Fred and I were in the back of a cab, and the cab driver recognized him. He turned around and said, "I know you, you're Ma Ting, famous American artist and professor. I saw you on TV last night." Fred and I were both absolutely amazed. A documentary about Fred and his artwork had been filmed by China's national television network, CCTV, several years earlier, but was shelved without explanation. Fred supposed that the film was forgotten and discarded. But then, 10 years later, it had suddenly been released without any kind of announcement or warning and broadcast all over China. The political climate was then more suitable, apparently, than it was when the initial documentary was filmed. A great surprise to everyone, but it gave Fred a new sense of acclaim and recognition throughout China. Fred's involvement with China continued until his death. It seems appropriate that this memorial and the accompanying exhibition of Fred's artwork should be here at the Silicon Valley Asian Art Center. I'd like to thank Ren Ming, and the leadership of the Silicon Valley Asian Art Center for putting this together. The artistic connection between East and West was an important part of Fred's life. But Fred saw teaching and writing as interconnected elements of his own identity. Despite his considerable achievements as an artist and a writer, it seems clear that Fred Martin's legacy was primarily as an educator. A student at SFAI once told me that Fred's art history survey class was his favorite class. Every Tuesday morning, I get up and I laugh myself to sleep. But over the past 3 generations, there have been literally thousands of students who've been inspired by Fred. Some became famous. Their artwork and ideas have influenced the art world. Many others who never sought or achieved artistic recognition lived more fulfilling and meaningful lives because of Fred's influence. I remember the outpouring of love and affection at Fred's retirement party at SFAI in 1992. The sense of rapport between Fred and the students and the faculty was palpable. He was given a bronze pair of Birkenstock sandals, one of his trademarks, as a symbol of that admiration. He responded simply and honestly by saying, "I love you all." After he retired as dean at SFAI, Fred and I worked together at JFK University in Berkeley in a program called Arts and Consciousness that offered graduate degree programs combining art, personal development, and spiritual practice. Fred was able to explore new ways of teaching art in a very different context than SFAI. I think Fred did some of his best teaching in those years at JFK. Like SFAI, JFK University tragically closed down for financial reasons. Regardless of where he taught, Fred was dedicated to his students. I remember clearly Fred saying in a discussion about the importance of teaching from one's own artistic practice, "You know, it's just all about self-affirmation. That matters more than anything." It's a sad irony that Fred passed away only a few months after SFAI finally closed its doors. In fact, my last conversation with Fred was about what went wrong at SFAI. We never figured it out. I think their nearly simultaneous passing marks the end of an important era. Everything changes, doesn't it? Despite living 3,000 miles away in the past 14 years, I've been fortunate to be able to maintain my friendship with Fred. I've seen him almost every year that I've come out to visit California. I will miss our long discussions over vodka martinis late into the night. I'll miss Fred's brilliant insight, astonishingly broad knowledge of almost everything. I'll miss the joy he took in simple things like singing karaoke in a sleazy Chinese bar at the age of 91. I'll miss the Fred bombs. I'll miss Fred's wisdom, his kindness, and his always understated sense of ironic humor. We will not see another like him. We all grieve his loss, but please join me in celebrating Fred's life. I believe Fred Martin will be remembered as a genuine art hero. Thank you.